Hello and welcome to this edition of A Conversation With. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network. And joining us today via Zoom, we have Professor Brian Glyn Williams from UMass Dartmouth. He is back again. Haven't talked to him in a little bit, but we figured he and I were both chatting through the email that it was probably time to bring him in because there is just lots happening in the world right now that we have been focusing on in the past 2-3 years. And it's amazing how fast things have changed right now. First, thanks for coming on. I know you're busy. You're right in the middle of your semester, but I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, always a pleasure, Jim.
So let's start with the first thing that you and I first started talking about, the war in Ukraine. We'll get to Gaza certainly as well. But, we just crossed the 3-year anniversary of this war. You and I started talking about it right at the beginning. I'm curious right now as to how you look at where that war stands as we sit and chat right now.
Well, it is a somber anniversary. We're 3 years into the bloodiest war in Europe since World War II, and the battlefield has had some surprising developments in that period. Everybody expected the Russians to run all over Ukraine and conquer it in a matter of weeks. In fact, I think Putin gave his generals 6 days to get Kiev, overthrow the government, and put a pro-Russian puppet in. And these Ukrainians have shown tremendous resilience on the battlefield as a society, as fighters, and they managed to repulse the Russians from 50% of the territory they conquered during their initial invasion back in February of 2022. But the Russians have greater manpower numbers, and for all the fact that the Ukrainians are fighting back well, using technology like drones and defeating the Black Sea Fleet, which was a miracle because they don't have their own navy,
Mm.
the Russians' numbers are beginning to tell on the battlefield, and they're making incremental advances, but they've come at the cost of hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers' lives. It's become a meat grinder for the Russians.
Yeah,
So
I saw the latest numbers. I mean, they actually don't have the latest numbers. It's over 100,000 according to all the stats that you see, but nobody really knows for sure.
yeah,
And I know that actually even for the Ukrainians too, you're talking, I've seen anywhere from 30,000 to 80,000. I mean, we just don't know how much of an impact. And that's just soldiers. I know that civilians, you're talking 12,000 civilians in Ukraine that have lost their lives in this war. The cost has been high for both sides.
both sides. Yeah, we've had whole cities literally wiped off the map by these indiscriminate Russian bombardments. We've had mass rape. So yeah, the civilians, of course, are suffering terribly in Ukraine from this war. That I should stress, despite what Trump said, Ukraine most certainly did not invade Russia. Russia launched this war, and Trump was flat out wrong when he said Ukraine started the war.
But there are those that say they did. And I'm curious and I know what you're saying, but I'm curious as to on the other side, what could have prompted that thought that Ukraine started the war? Was it because they started aligning too much with the West?
You know, the Ukrainians have a history of facing genocide at the hands of the Russians. Under Stalin, for example, under the Tsars, they've killed millions of Ukrainians. And Ukrainians desperately wanted to break away from the long autocratic shadow of Russia and merge with the European Union in the economic and cultural sense. And this was seen as unforgivable by one man, Vladimir Putin. He doesn't agree that Ukrainians have their own national history, their own ethnic identity, which they do. Now, I speak Russian, and trust me, Ukrainian is a different language. And Ukrainians have a history of being wild, free frontiersmen, not living under an autocratic czar like Ivan the Terrible or Vladimir Putin today. So as soon as Ukrainians began, working out mechanisms to join the European Union, there was no real discussion of them joining NATO. That's a straw man invention by Republicans who want to wash their hands of Ukraine and an excuse by Putin. There were no mechanisms in place for Ukraine down the road to join NATO. But it was this movement towards the European Union that Putin has used as an excuse to go in and engage in mass murder, slaughter, and trying to wipe out a free nation in the 21st century, a la Adolf Hitler.
The war, it's gone on for 3 years now, and it's amazing that it's gone on for 3 years. Uh, there's been so many different dynamics as to how it's proceeded. Obviously, the U.S. had a lot of support. You had right at the start, there was bipartisan support for this. Now, 3 years later, obviously, we have a new administration, totally different sort of set of guidelines, I guess, that we will use to help them down the road. The president is, they're trying to negotiate a peace deal right now with Russia, but not with Ukraine. But although my understanding is they're trying to get a deal right now as well that's, depending on who you talk to, is just days away from being ratified.
Yeah, I mean, I think Trump is willing to sacrifice everything to get his peace deal. He reminds me of a guy, a prime minister named Neville Chamberlain, who was the prime minister of Britain back in the late 30s when Adolf Hitler was invading and conquering countries in Europe like Austria and Czechoslovakia. And all Neville Chamberlain wanted was peace in our time. That was his mantra, quote unquote, peace in our time. And he sacrificed Britain's principles, the principle of standing up to tyranny, defending democracy, all in the name of getting a quick peace. And we saw how that went. It emboldened Adolf Hitler, and eventually Winston Churchill came along and stood up to him. We're in a similar phase in history right now. Trump wants the sugar rush that will come from getting a peace no matter what the cost. Give Russia everything they want, even before the negotiations begin, which is not the art of the deal. His book that he claims that he's a great negotiator. You don't give one side everything they want. In this case, not allowing Ukraine to have security guarantees or to join NATO, and not allowing Ukraine to have its 20% of its territory liberated from the Russians who banned their language and culture. Trump, in his heedless rush to get the Nobel Prize or whatever, or get this peace, is sacrificing America's role in the world.
But
We
why
are the
would
article of democracy.
but why would President Zelensky or Ukrainians go with that deal? I mean, I know that most of the deal, the big thing is providing the minerals or a portion of the minerals that they're unique minerals that they have in Ukraine to the United States to offset the cost so far that the war has given them. But why would Ukraine sign the deal at all?
I don't think they would. And that's the irony here. Trump is negotiating for Ukraine. He's deciding their fate, their future. These brave men and women who are defending their democracy for a new generation to live free, not under Russian tyranny. Trump is deciding their fate without even asking them what they want. So in essence, he's giving them a diktat. I'm going to decide what you're going to give up, and I'm going to give you peace whether you want it or not. I don't think the Ukrainians will sign a peace on Trump and Putin's terms, because Trump is giving Putin everything he wants and giving Ukraine nothing they want.
But is it realistic to think that whether Trump is negotiating a peace deal or not, whoever is it realistic to think that Ukraine would get everything they want too, that they'd get the 20% back of the land, that they'd get Crimea back, that they would have security guarantees, that they'd be part of NATO? I mean, is that realistic as well?
But I think there's a middle line. You know, when you begin negotiations, each party has to give something up. And Trump seems to be missing that entirely in his rush to this so-called peace, or to give, I think he wants to reward Putin for his aggression. Here's the middle ground. Ukraine could say get 10% of its conquered territory back and give the Russians Crimea, because that was historically a part of the Russian Empire. And instead of full membership in NATO, perhaps having security guarantees from a less formalized relationship with NATO to defend them from an inevitable future Russian invasion.
This is what the American people voted for in November. They want this. They want the president. They want what he's doing. And this is what Americans want to get out of this. They want nothing to do with it. And this is fine with them.
You have to ask yourself, if you sat down with the average American and told him, what does your country stand for? You know, did you respect Ronald Reagan for standing up to the Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, and telling him to tear down this wall? Do you believe America is a unique, indispensable nation on the global stage? Are we a benign hegemon, the arsenal of democracy? They'll say yes, and they'll say they want those principles to be enacted on by our leaders, including the commander in chief. But of course, I think we all want to see peace in Ukraine and Gaza and elsewhere. But we don't want it to come at the horrific cost of surrendering to mass murderers, of surrendering our principles, our founding principles. Our Constitution is built around the idea of democracy. We export democracy. We protect democracies. We don't align ourselves as allies to people like Vladimir Putin, who stands for everything America does not stand for on the world stage.
But you have seen now that there's more and more people that say Ukraine is not our problem. The nationalism that, not just in America anymore, you see nationalism across the country. The German elections recently, the far right party had the second most popular vote. So you're seeing this wave of nationalism across the world, Italy, Germany, France. It seems as though there's a total dynamic in the way governments across the world are being run and what people want from them. It seems, if you just as a layman, that most people we leave us alone. That has nothing to do with us. All we care about is us.
Back in 1941, when Hitler was marching across Europe and the Battle of Britain was happening and London was on fire and the Japanese Empire was swarming across the Pacific, a majority of Americans wanted nothing to do with these wars. On 9/11, 9/10, September 10th, 2001, we wanted nothing to do with the world either. We were, in essence, an ostrich with our head in the ground, not concerned about the rest of the world. We have this tradition of isolationism, but it takes moments like the Pearl Harbor attack of 9/11, December 7th, 1941, or the 9/11 attacks to wake us up and mobilize us to go out into the world and make it right. I don't want us to have another September 11th or Pearl Harbor style wake-up event. But I think that if we do concede our role in the world, our leadership role as the beacon on the hill, which I believe we are, we'll see if we sustain that reputation under this administration. Our unique role in the world as a beacon of hope, the defender of democracy, if we surrender that, it will not make us safer. In fact, on the contrary, it will make the world we live in more dangerous because it will embolden, for example, Xi Jinping in China to go for Taiwan. He knows America is not a reliable ally. We don't defend our allies. We don't defend democracies. And I think it'll lead to nuclear proliferation. Countries that don't see America as being protected under our umbrella, like Poland, are already talking about getting nuclear weapons in the absence of American strength. We provide safety for America through strength and safety to the world through strength. Caving in to murderous dictators with blood on their hands, whose troops have engaged in mass rape, slaughter, mutilation, and murder in Ukrainian towns like Bucha and Aleppo, Syria, will not make those citizens of America who dream of not being involved in the world safer. On the contrary, it will embolden those who stand for all the principles we as Americans do not defend.
How optimistic are you that the European Union will step up and fill the void left by the United States? And what really can they do? Because they don't certainly have the capabilities to supply the weapons and what have you that the United States has.
Yeah, you have a good point there. I worry about their potential. They are planning for a post-American world, a world in which we dig ourselves back into the hole of isolationism and don't stand for the things we share with Europeans. They say that if we do pull out of NATO, which Trump discussed in his previous term, they will have to compensate for that to the tune of maybe $300 billion and 300,000 new soldiers. So it's going to hurt the Europeans, who are now already increasing their defense budgets. All of them are trying to surpass the 2% threshold. I know Trump has been pushing them to increase their defense spending, and I agree with him on that level. But I think they all know that now. Putin has woken them to the threat the Russian Federation poses to all of their collective security, and they're all increasing their defense budgets, including Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, up to 3%. So, but I wonder, can they really stand on their own without their big brother? We've had this post-World War II friendship with our partners, the French, the British. I'm a British citizen myself. We are seen as their greatest allies. But the Atlantic Ocean just got bigger in the last week due to Trump's proposal at the UN that did not coincide with the European Union proposal. He refused to condemn Russian aggression the way the Europeans did. And we are burning our bridges of friendship going all the way back to Winston Churchill and FDR.
Speaking of the UN resolution, Israel did not support that resolution either, and obviously they're still at war in Gaza with Hamas. I know there's a ceasefire, tenuous at best right now. There are still captives, hostages being held in Gaza. We don't know really how many are alive or not. This situation there really doesn't seem to be any different than really when you look at Ukraine. It's, you're looking for a peace deal, but I don't know if people really want the peace right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. In the last few months, Israel has emerged as a different state than it was before October 7th. We've seen them degrade and destroy Hezbollah's fighting capacity, killing thousands of rank and file members. They killed Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hamas, last September. They've killed the head of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, and the political head, Ismail Haniyeh. They've killed 47,000 Palestinians in an area the size of Philadelphia in the Gaza Strip. But as you mentioned, Hamas is still there. They've proven to be stubborn and resilient. According to IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, they've killed 17,000 Hamas fighters, but the CIA estimates they've recruited just that many back again. So it's like a whack-a-mole, the funfair game.
Yeah.
How can they call us a victory when Hamas still controls the Gaza Strip?
Well, the reality too is that you would think it's almost impossible to totally eradicate Hamas from the Gaza Strip. There's still some remnants that are going to stay there and be there for the long term, for the foreseeable future. And I know that the hard right in Israel, they want to continue fighting. They want to continue going into Gaza. But is it realistic to even expect, even if they do that, that you're totally going to eradicate Hamas? And I don't know.
No, I mean, I don't think that's doable. I mean, the Israeli economy has been devoted itself totally to this war for the last 15 months. Those troops are tired. Their businesses need tending to. The Israeli Defense Forces are strained from fighting in southern Lebanon and in Gaza. So, you have the hard right wing that you mentioned, these messianic Zionist Jews like Itamar Ben-Gvir, who want endless war, who want to conquer the West Bank and expel indigenous Palestinians from their homes to create a greater Israel. So, I don't think we've achieved any long-term peace in Gaza any more than we have in Ukraine.
Let's not forget, though, I mean, too, it was Hamas that attacked Israel on October 7th of 2023. They did perpetrate it. And I think that's, Israel does have the right to defend itself. Everybody said that. President Biden said that. Everybody has said that at the time. So I guess how far do you go? It seems the Palestinians are the civilians are right in the middle of this conflict, obviously, and there's nothing they can do about it. As you and I have talked about before, as you have said, the Palestinians are no fans of Hamas either.
Yeah, and Hamas's popularity rating has gone down dramatically since they launched that horrific attack that you mentioned was the catalyst for Israel's invasion. I understand why Israel had to launch Operation Swords of Iron to destroy a clear and present danger operating on their border. And I teach a class here at University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, about the Israel-Palestine war. And I tell my students about the real horrors of what's called the Black Sabbath attack. It was horrific beyond horrific, animalistic, rape, mutilation, mass murder of families, burning families alive. Israel had to go in and suppress Hamas as a threat. But as we've seen with our own experience in the war in Afghanistan and Iraq, these insurgencies in the Muslim world are hard to tamper down. It's a Sisyphean task trying to eradicate ISIS, for example. We have 2,000 troops in Syria right now trying to suppress this resurgent ISIS force. And I'm afraid Trump, who yanked troops out of Syria back in 2019, October, will get bored of our counter ISIS mission in Syria, and he didn't see the utility of these sort of operations, and end that war too, that sort of counterinsurgency.
The president's proposal as well for the United States to take over Gaza and have the Palestinians go to Jordan or Egypt, certainly rejected by Jordan and Egypt. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, if it's one thing the American public did not vote for when they chose Trump as their president, is for us to do an occupation of another war-torn Muslim nation, a la George Bush Jr.'s fiasco in Iraq from 2003 to 2011, which cost us 4,500 troops' lives and $2 trillion. No American wants to see American soldiers coming home in flag-covered caskets from another Middle Eastern war zone. So Trump has said America should, quote unquote, own Gaza. He has talked about turning into a
French Riviera.
Yeah, French Riviera. I mean, they call it Gaza a Lago, Mar-a-Lago, Gaza a Lago. That's a non-starter. You won't get the American people behind that. You won't get the Jordanians behind it because half their country is already Palestinian refugees. They're not going to want to import 2 million more radicalized Palestinians who support Hamas into their democracy, where they'll be a destabilizing factor and no doubt engage in terrorism and try enforcing Sharia Islamic law. Ditto Egypt. So I think Trump's in la la land with this project of occupying Gaza and somehow magically transporting them to another country on a magic carpet, I guess. You'd have to pull them out of those buildings. That's their ancestral homeland. That will cost us American troops' lives.
The fact that, as you said, Israel had to go in, and again, we've talked about this in the past, Israel did have to respond. They still have hostages there that are Israeli citizens being held against their will. I mean, in a sense, you can understand, I guess, Israel's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But what's the end game, I guess, is what you're looking at.
There's only one solution to this, and it is not through Operation Swords of Iron Part 2, which will just cost more. Hundreds of Israeli soldiers have died in that war. We can't forget their sacrifice either. You can't solve this. Not every problem in the world is a nail that needs to be solved with a blunt force of a hammer, i.e. war. The only way to have a permanent ending to this albatross hanging around the neck of Israel ever since 1967, when they captured the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, is to give the Palestinians what Israel has, a homeland. That is the only solution. There's no military solution. Netanyahu, who is militantly against any homeland for the Palestinians, needs to do what it takes to make his people free from having this dark cloud of perpetual warfare on their borders by giving the Palestinians dignity, self-determination, what every nation wants. Then Israel will come out of the cold and be recognized by Saudi Arabia, and that's the holy grail for peace talks. Once you bring the Saudis on board and they recognize Israel, it will diffuse the situation and it'll be safer for Americans. We get attacked as collateral damage for our reflexive support for Israel, even when it's killing Palestinian men, women, children in the West Bank who are protesting. We pay a collateral damage price for our support for Israel, even when it's engaging in war crimes. It'll make America safer. I, as an American, would like to see our country made safer by ending the wars that have been fought ever since 1948 in the Middle East and giving Palestinians peace and freedom.
We got a couple minutes left here, and I just want to have a crystal ball. And I don't know if you have it because things can change so fast the way things are going right now. Start with Israel because we've been talking about that. How do you see the next 6 months or so turning out right now in Israel and the Gaza Strip?
You know, I think those hostages will be released and we'll have a sort of ceasefire. There will be tentative efforts to bring in aid and assistance to those starving people who are facing starvation conditions there in Gaza. And Hamas will reexert its authority and control. It will start to do conferences and have meetings and little parliaments and things. It will become, again, a de facto Hamas-run terror zone. And we'll be right back where we were before October 7th. We'll be where we were on October 6th of last year.
How about Ukraine? And I know that there's talks in the peace deal that Europe could have peacekeepers in there, but what do you think? And you've lived there, I know, you've talked about that in the past. How do you think right now that situation turns out? Do you think there'll be something signed by President Zelensky?
It's almost beyond my pay grade. It's a hard one. I think we finally, in order for there to be a peace treaty, both sides in the conflict have to feel it is in their interest to have a cessation of hostilities. I think we're getting close there. This is a immovable object, Ukraine, being struck by an unstoppable object, Russia. It's become a meat grinder. We've had 3 years. There's been very little movement on the battlefield. I think the time is ripe for a negotiated peace, but it can't be what Trump's doing. You can't negotiate peace without having both of the countries involved in the conflict in the negotiations.
And do you think that Europe will be part of that solution as well, or that agreement?
Absolutely. You cannot. Trump has sidelined our European allies. Trump has given Putin everything he wants. Trump is a dream come true for Putin. Putin has wanted America to fracture with his NATO allies, and Trump has done that for him. Putin has wanted to be rewarded for his aggression, and Trump has signaled that he will legitimize everything Putin has illegally conquered in Ukraine. And Trump has said there will be no NATO membership for Ukraine. Putin is going to be the winner here if Trump has his way. But that will infuriate our NATO allies, who've given more resources than America, and who fear that if Putin is rewarded by Trump for his naked Hitler-style aggression, that teeny Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, who Putin also doesn't see as legitimate, will be next. And Russia has a long history of invading Poland. They will be next. And we'll be back where we were when Neville Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of Britain, gave Europe, quote unquote, peace in our time by legitimizing Hitler's conquest and instead whetting his appetite. Because once these conquerors feel emboldened and feel they can get away with it, they will go for more. And certainly China will take note and go for the democracy that we've defended ever since the 1940s, Taiwan.
We've got to leave it there. It's great talking to you as always, Professor Brian Glyn Williams from UMass Dartmouth. We'll touch base again with you, I'm sure, in the next couple of months. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Jim. Always a pleasure. Take care.
Thank you very much. That's going to do it for this edition of A Conversation With. I'm Jim Marshall, the New Bedford Cable Network. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Did you know that you can watch any of New Bedford Cable Network shows anytime, anywhere on all of your mobile devices? How, you may ask? Just log on to nbcablenetwork.com and bam! You have all 3 channels at your fingertips: public, educational, and government access. Here, you can view our program schedules, watch our channel's live broadcasts, or search for a particular program in our vast library of shows. Last year alone, New Bedford Cable Network produced over 500 shows, and nearly all of them are available online at nbcablenetwork.com. Not only can you stay up to date with what's happening in your local government and schools, but also dive into some of New Bedford Cable Network's original award-winning programs. So check us out at nbcablenetwork.com.